was 5 years old when it hit me. It was an awful blow. I realized that eventually life ends. I couldn't come to grips with the idea of not existing anymore. That couldn't be right. Disbelief was quickly followed by an unbelievable sadness, which fortunately passed. But as the decades go by, that feeling surfaces and then fades. I've always been curious, how do other people deal with it? How do they manage it? I can't be the only one who wants to know, how do we live knowing that we are going to die?
Afraid to die? What do you think happens when you die? Do you believe that there's any kind of an afterlife? When's the first time you ever thought about the fact that your life wouldn't go on forever?
I was 7, and I realized it when my grandmother died.
I'm sure a lot of kids, wondered, what's that all about, this finality? Does she mean she's not coming back?
I think I just kind of knew that things that are living come to an end.
I was shot in the right posterior thigh with a sawed-off shotgun at point-blank range.
My son was killed in a car accident, and so that really brought it home to me.
My father's death altered my daily life and the way I look at life.
It's been said that death and the sun cannot be stared at for any period of time. If we were to be completely focused on the fact of our mortality all the time, we would go insane.
I was born in 1946 in Germany in a displaced persons hospital. My parents were Holocaust survivors. My father was essentially survived by being hidden in an attic, and my mother and her mother, my grandmother, survived in various labor camps. We always grew up knowing that we did not want to hurt our parents or make them suffer more than they had, and we were very conscious of that all our lives. Having been born after the war to parents who lost so much, I think I became very aware at a very early age about life not being infinite, and that life could change very quickly. I was diagnosed with ALS, which is a degenerative muscular disease for which there really is no cure right now. As you can tell, some of the symptoms involve speech deterioration and swallowing and breathing. Those are my main symptoms now.
And I know it's certainly much more difficult for her, but for me it's heartbreaking.
When I first got the diagnosis, Jim, my husband, was with me.
And I was shell-shocked. I mean, I had the feeling, you have got to be kidding.
It didn't quite register. It did, but I was more in a state of disbelief and maybe some denial too.
Denial is a wonderful protector, but there are only so many times and so many ways that you can successfully, for the moment only, fool yourself.
If there is no cure, chances are that I will pass away from this disease.
I just can't believe it. I just cannot comprehend it.
When you wake up in the morning and there's nothing wrong with you, it's like a miracle. It's like you rolled dice. Say you had to get a 7 to have a healthy situation. For every day, years, 5, 10, 25, you're rolling 7s for years, for decades you're rolling 7s, but you're not even thinking about that when you're younger. Now I'm aware that, oh my God, this is so lucky.
ALS struck Rachel out of the blue. Whether or not we want to face it, the raw truth is a grim diagnosis or sudden death can come at any time or any moment for any of us.
All of us know we're going to die. The question then is, how do we incorporate that into our day-to-day lives? And to what extent does denying that we're going to die get in the way?
I believe that we're driven by our need to suppress an awareness of our mortality primarily by fear.
And in communities and cultures where death and dying is commonly encountered, in small villages, especially amongst young people, I think it's more readily accepted that people live and inevitably die. When I was a younger doctor working in South Africa at little mission hospitals, I came across patients there who had a much more realistic expectation of death and dying. And in my experience, this was because these folk were more used to family members dying, especially children. It's not uncommon in a family that we would see at the hospital that one or two of the young children had died, before they'd reached the age of 2.
There's an interesting paradox. We are the products of millions of years of evolution. Evolution, of course, is driven by the survival instinct. The survival instinct has helped us, over time, to evolve to a state where we can contemplate the fact that we're going to die. That contemplation enriches our life, but at the same time, threatens us. People become aware of their mortality in very different ways. There's the loss of innocence, if you will, in childhood, when kids start to put it together that their puppy isn't coming back, that the neighbor kid who got hit by a car isn't coming back.
Most children come upon their awareness of death, perhaps with the death of a loved one, a grandparent or aunt, uncle, or parent. And usually it's with a lot of fear and trepidation.
The separation, the fear of separation, the idea of death. Very often a child, once they get the concept of death, doesn't really get the concept that they're going to die.
My first recollection of when I remember someone died is when my grandparents started dying. And very intense, of course, very sad, very jolting. But I didn't connect it to my own life. It was like an abstract thing. You're 12 and they're 85 and they die. I didn't connect it. I felt bad. It was weird. Oh, they're never gonna. The idea of never seeing them ever again. It's weird.
People regard it as a sort of a morbid subject. We don't want to talk about that. Why occupy your mind with these depressing thoughts? So for that reason, it then becomes later on in life something that, as you have to face up to it, becomes, I think, more difficult to deal with.
I knew you were going to die even as a younger person, but in my 20s, more of a real but then it faded out, It's too overwhelming to just digest like a math problem. Okay, this equals this, therefore this. It's like the reality of it is so giant that your mind won't take it in as a final, all right, that's it. It's too big.
How can we think about the history of, say, Western civilization's approach to mortality? It's interesting to look at how Christianity has dealt with the dead over time. If you go back just a few centuries, people dying was a commonplace activity that took place at home. When people were buried, they were often buried in the church. They were buried under the floor. As that filled up, they might be buried in the walls and then perhaps a courtyard immediately adjacent to the church. Over time, the distance between the place of worship and the place of burial grew, so that cemeteries, which were originally part of the church and then immediately adjacent to the church, eventually came to be miles and miles away from the church. The church became a place to affirm life, in many cases to affirm eternal life. Come to church, you get into paradise, you live forever. And the cemetery, death, was something far away, not to be mentioned, not to be addressed, only to be hidden.
In the 19th century, people's closeness to death was much more apparent, and their ways of dealing with death, there was a lot more emphasis on sentiment, on being next to a loved one in death, even taking photographs at the end of the 19th century of people on their deathbed, people who had died. Certainly beginning with World War I, when we had so many people dying, and we felt so far away from them. We began this movement towards distancing ourselves from death and dying. If we look to the mid-20th century, to the Vietnam War, for instance, by the time we get there, we are seeing bodies coming back from Vietnam, the coffins draped with flags. We don't see that today. So the progression has been most certainly to move further and further away from death. I think in American culture there's far less exposure to death, particularly now. With all the media and popular culture interest in zombies and vampires and such, I believe that students think they are getting close to the idea of death, whereas in fact they're placing things between themselves and that idea and that thought.
The Hollywood idea of death and guns and shooting people, I think, is a great disservice to us.
It's like death is entertainment for us, as long as it's happening to somebody else. But when it happens to you, the entertainment value strips away completely. And it's almost like we're trying to cheat death by treating it in a light and entertaining fashion. I grew up in a funeral home, and it's 6 feet under. Yeah, we get asked about it all the time. And I remember asking my brother if he watched it, and he's like, it's totally not realistic. And I was like, Peter, it's not a documentary. It's fiction. The first time it really hit me that I grew up in a place that a lot of people would find strange or even creepy. The phone rang, and it was for my father. And my mother said, go out and tell your father there's a phone call for him. And I walked into the embalming room, and there was a dead body on the slab, and the entire chest cavity was open, and all of the innards were in a plastic bag on a different table. And I paused for a few seconds. I mean, it was always conceptual that I knew what my father did. But when you see an elderly man with his empty chest cavity and all of his viscera in a large plastic bag, that really hit home. But it really never connected. You know, because when you're a kid, you're immortal. And you've got this sense of, you know, that happens to other people. It doesn't happen to us. One of the courses I teach is neuroscience. And we talk about the maturation of the adolescent brain. And one of the parts of the brain that can actually comprehend mortality isn't done when you're 17, 18 years old. It's the prefrontal cortex, and it develops between the ages of 17 and 24. And so much of what these kids do and what the inhibitions and controls they do not have those are all in the prefrontal cortex. And so I understand when they can't control their emotions. I understand when they can't see that far into the future, because I liken the prefrontal cortex to an undercooked muffin, and the muffin's not done.
I think the students get an opportunity to think through their position on a number of very fundamental issues related to life and death. And these are going to help them in their everyday experiences in the months and years ahead.
Well, actually, one of my biggest fears in life is death. So I figured that the best way to kind of confront this fear was to learn more about it, to look at it with a different perspective of, oh, it's going to be a great journey, instead of, you know, fearing the end.
I think I'd rather get like cut off in the head or something like really fast and just die instead of, you know, having to like stay at the hospital and just like, you know, like stay in the bed every day.
I was probably an early teen, maybe 11 or 12, and my family and I were taking a flight to Miami. And on the flight, there was a storm of some sort over Miami. The turbulence was getting really bad until eventually all the lights turned out and the plane fell. There was like a lot of screaming and people were really panicking. And I think that's when I first came to think, because as I sat there, I'm like, oh my gosh, this plane is going down. And that's it for me. And when we landed, I was like, wow, like, I survived that. But the idea of death coming at me so early and so young, it made it such a reality that death could come at any moment.
My interest in death and dying was because I feel like it'll make me a better doctor. I feel like as a physician, a lot of people just keep pushing and pushing, and I feel like it's better to recognize a point where you need to stop and let a person go.
Megan, don't you dare make faces at this camera.
I was born in Overland Park, Kansas. I was really involved in sports. But, you know, I had a great childhood. I played soccer for about 11 years, loved soccer, and I also did cheerleading. You know, I had this really great, basic, happy childhood, and then I was a very angsty teenager, just, you know, the regular teenage rebellion, I think.
Rocks!
It's an incredible vista. It's probably one of the greatest vistas in the world.
It was this pretty, like, well-rounded, good, general, I guess, middle America thing, since I do live in the middle of America. I've known I wanted to be a doctor since I was in first grade. Originally, the fascination with being a doctor was because the kid next to me had already said he wanted to be an archaeologist, and I was just trying to be different. And then as I've gotten older, like, I've just been more and more drawn to it. I'm at Boston College, and I'm studying pre-med. But at 19, you feel pretty invincible, you know? You're healthy, and you're gonna be healthy into the, like, future as far as you can see, and you never, like, dawns on you that that might not be the case. I remember the doctor telling me I had leukemia and just, like, kind of going into shock. And my parents were crying around me, and the doctor was immediately going into freezing eggs, missing 3 years of school, like, just throwing all this stuff at me. Like, it was really shocking, really overwhelming. Like, my heart's even beating really fast right now thinking about it. I was trying to, like, find some kind of acceptance of the idea, but I was 20. My friend Francesca flew out twice, I think it was, to come visit me in the hospital.
It was all that I could do that would help. I hoped I was helping, and she seemed to want me there. I just wanted to see her and make sure she was okay as much as she could be.
I was in the hospital for 28 days that first time around, and then I was released back home, but I had to go back in for 3 more cycles of outpatient chemotherapy, so I missed the entire semester.
She was just really easygoing about everything. I never had to entertain her.
Put your shoe up. Have you ever had that before, Kai?
No.
Just for you.
Look it.
Just for you.
Look at that's so tired. She's got it all decorated. She's got it all going. Wow, I didn't see this like
And it didn't seem like as big of a deal. We were kind of under the impression that she'd come back and she'd be fine and then it would be over.
They kept telling me, you know, we really don't want to ever go to bone marrow transplant. Like, that's the last ditch thing. That's absolutely the last option. And I went back to school and was doing normal things. 6 months later, in June, I relapsed. I just remember the doctor looking at me and being like, Megan, you should call your mom.
I don't have no fear of dying. No. Because I realized that when you die, then you're at a better place.
Never to worry about whether I'm going to die or not. That's just going to happen. It's secondary.
And you have no fear about that?
No, what am I supposed to be afraid of?
I'm not afraid of it at all. I think it's going to be very exciting.
I don't know if I'm afraid to die. I don't think about it anymore, but I know I'm not going to die today. So I'm going to enjoy today. Tomorrow will take care of itself.
I just had a son, and that kind of bothers me more, knowing that I won't be here forever.
People struggle with dying. They don't want to die, but I think it's the semantics. It's not dying. You're going to whatever awaits you. And maybe that's why some people struggle, because they know what's waiting for them.
It's disappointing to me in this journey to realize that, you know, it's game over at some point.
If death is the end, what are we afraid of? Are we literally afraid of nothing? In my case, I would say the answer is yes. It's the idea that everything I value will come to nothing. Relationships, work, sense of security, all gone, just like that.
My name is Michael Ruine. I grew up in a large Irish Catholic family, 4 older brothers, 2 older sisters, and I was the youngest of 7. And it was a good childhood. We were all very close with one another. A typical, you know, church on Sundays, big Sunday dinners. Religion played a big part in the younger years. Myself and all 4 of my older brothers were altar boys. We'd go to church every Sunday. I guess like my father said, you know, the family that prays together stays together. I don't know if I could say what exactly it meant to me, but it was just something there that I could feel, you know. There was just this faith. Every time my father and mother had us pray the rosaries together as a family, every time that we did that, it actually worked for whoever we were praying for, you know. So I think there was definitely that connection that I was able to see.
I met Michael when I was in high school. What stood out for me was like he just seemed to be very generous. He always had people in mind.
Michael's decision to go into the military was almost, you could say, predetermined in a way.
For a few years, every other year, I'd have a brother or sister leave and go off and join the military. I think my first realization of mortality would probably be after September 11th. I just saw my brothers and sisters, you know, preparing themselves to go off to war and battle, and I think that's when it kind of hit me that, you know, these people that I love and care about are, you know, could soon be dead. I think prior to enlisting, I didn't think about death too much. You know, I joined when I was 17. Just had that cocky teenage attitude that it's not gonna happen to me. I had no desire to be an operating room technician. I didn't even know what one was. Whatever the military needs the most is whatever had the largest bonus, so it just happened to be that job.
I thought it was very fitting, actually, because he always had other people's interests in mind. He was always looking out for people.
After basic training, you go to Texas for about 2.5 months, and you just do all classroom training. And then afterwards, you go to another base where you just train on site on a hospital for about 2.5 more months. After that, we got deployed to Iraq for 12 months, 4 months in Mosul, Iraq, which is the northern part of Kurd territory, and then 8 months in Al-Assad, which is a little bit southwest in Iraq. Right when we got to Mosul, it was a hot zone, so when we got there, it was just, we were thrown right into the mix. You know, our plane had to do one of those emergency landings and then just run off the plane. And, you know, I think that night we had our first mass casualty situation, which is when you just get a bucket load of patients come in that are, you know, dead or dying. That first day, right when you go from, you know, being a non-combat vet to the next day you're a combat vet, you know, it happens all at once.
I do think about dying every day. It crosses my mind a lot. I think about things like that I could be sitting at my home and a truck could go through the wall, or that right now while we're talking something could go wrong with the electrical system here and I could be electrocuted. It always comes in a way you're not expecting. And when I see that in news stories, I think about the poor person that was struck by the bus. They just left a Starbucks, or they had breakfast that morning with their mom, and it wasn't the day they thought like, I'm sure I'm gonna die today. So, you know, it always, for the most part, I think comes as a surprise. I've had AIDS for 28 years. So that in and of itself has changed my perspective on mortality. I found out in 1986, and I had a doctor tell me that I shouldn't take it as a death sentence, that I could live for another year. So I lived my life pretty much thinking that was going to happen. And it took a long time before I realized, like, either God doesn't want me or Satan's afraid I'll take over, but it seems like I'm going to be here for a while. It was really a blessing that I didn't see at the time, because it freed me to do things that I wanted to do, like get a macaw, and I became an artist, and I paint, and I'm a poet. I write stories, and I traveled. I was like, I'm going to cash in my chips now. So I traveled around Europe and Central America. I took classes, not because I was working towards a degree, but because it's like, I just want to take that. So I lived my life in a way that I think a lot of people wish they would, and that I'm sure I wouldn't have had it been under different circumstances. Anything you want to say, buddy? Nothing? I've never been able to get this bird to talk on command.
Soon after I got diagnosed, I got this idea in my head that I wanted to be a hospital clown. I don't just want to be ALS. So I thought being a clown was a perfect antidote.
Your primary purpose is to admire the object, you see. So if someone is here and I think Rachel,
It was pretty intense. It began immediately with different exercises, and it was very physical. The more you kind of let go and not try to be funny, then I think that's really most effective. The primary thing was to trust my intuition. Today I am a toothpick. And not to think things too much, like, should I do that, should I do this? It was just going from the heart and trusting that it was going to be okay.
Never say you're a clown. It's a secret. Why? Because basically you can be anything you want. You can be an animal, you can be the river, you can be the wind, you can be many, many different things.
And it's okay being a Civ. I was so absorbed when I was here that I totally forgot what was going on anywhere else. I felt very free. I hope to bring that air of freedom and lightness into everyday life.
As Rachel discovered, clowning involves more than just making people laugh. It's about spontaneity and trust and the art of connection. In other words, beneath the humor, the currents run deep. I'd say the same about legendary comic Stephen Wright. Stephen and I became friends while working on a TV show some years ago. And I thought he might be a good mind to probe because of his unique, perspective-shifting take on life.
Myself, I've lived, and I think people live, they act like they're going to live to be 800 years old. Oh, yeah, okay, I'll do that. Now I'm extremely aware of it, and I try to do things right now. Oh, I should call that guy up. Yeah, I haven't talked to him in a while. Now I call that guy up. I should go there and visit that person. Now I go and do it, because you have no idea. If water was time, like if it came out of the shower was time, I have lived like you leave the shower on, and then you go somewhere, and the shower's going, and that's just time. That's how carefree or careless or unprecious it is. You're just like letting it go. Now I feel different about it. Sometimes I write down a list of the people who've passed away. And I read this list and I'm like, oh my God. And then I think all those people on the list, they thought like I thought, meaning that happens, that's other people. That happens to the other people. Yeah, I can be on that list, and it's like, it's jolting.
If you had the chance, would you want to live forever?
Why, do you have some kind of deal for me?
I think it was much harder the second time because it seemed much more real and the threat was a lot more real.
I just cried. And I didn't go home. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't want to tell anyone until I was sure. which they did not appreciate later on. It was really hard hearing that I had to get the bone marrow transplant. Your choice is to have the bone marrow transplant and have a 50% chance of survival, or not have the bone marrow transplant and die. So I made the decision pretty easy. It wasn't really real to me until that point. Like, I might actually die, this might kill me. My first thought was to go to the airport and fly to Europe, because somehow I thought that I could escape it if I was somewhere else. That day was for sure the hardest day of my life. Way, way worse than getting diagnosed.
She had a great job over the summer, and she was just starting to take her wig off and put it up, and she had to take it all off again, and I know that was hard on her. It's just rough. When I was sick, like, I'd be home in my bed and I'd wake up and I would have to, like, pat myself on the head, be like, oh, I'm still bald. Okay, that did happen. That wasn't, like, the worst dream ever. You go to the doctor, you go home, you wake up the next day, you do the same thing. And you just have to just keep going and keep going and keep going. They give you this long list, and it's just a really terrible meeting. They just, like, go over this list of 400 ways we might kill you. I think the one thing I would do differently as a physician myself would be to remind them that 50% of people do survive. I feel like I heard a lot, there's a 50% chance you might die, and you kind of stop realizing, oh, there's also a 50% chance I might live. The first day that I found out that I was in remission when I originally got diagnosed, that was a great day, but I think the best day for me was day 100 following my bone marrow transplant. The head doctor likes to give the good news, so he walked in with this giant smile on his face. It was like, 100% donor, you're already there, like, this is awesome. And so that was just the biggest relief, waiting to hear those words. And so when you finally did, it was like, oh, I'm like getting my life back. It was amazing. It was definitely the best day.
Having been diagnosed with prostate cancer, one of my best days was finding out that my cancer hadn't spread and that my surgery had gone well. My experience wasn't anywhere near as scary as Megan's, but it did make me think about the prospect of dying, something I've been doing off and on since early childhood. I doubt that I'm unique in that respect, which means that avoiding the subject with kids in an effort to quote-unquote protect them may not be a good idea.
Our children look to us for information about what is dangerous and what is not, about what should be a subject for discussion and what should be avoided. When we talk to our children about death, we are bringing them into a conversation that they're going to have with themselves one way or another, no matter what we do. When we talk with them openly about death, we're telling them this is an important topic, and it's a topic that will help you grow. So rather than avoiding it, let's really think about it together.
I think people should be educated from the time of birth in a certain way about what it means to not only live, but to what it means to die.
Sometimes we tell children, grandma's in heaven, and leave it at that. I don't think that does enough to deal with the physical reality of death. I think we have to talk about its permanence.
I think sensitively children should be introduced to the reality of impermanence. And I think one of the most powerful settings for that is the natural world, because you see impermanence so vividly there. And by analogy, we can transpose that reality into the reality of our human life.
I think the most important thing we can impart to our children is the safety inherent in discussing things, even things that upset us and that frighten us. Death brings up very powerful feelings in adults, and they reflexively want to protect their children from those painful feelings. What the kids see is avoidance, and they read avoidance as danger. By talking with your children about a loss, by bringing them into the discussion, not only of this person's death and disappearance, but also of your own pain and your sadness, you're validating the feelings they may already be having and opening up a conversation about one of the great mysteries of being a person.
It is the bedrock of our spiritual life, say the ancients. And our spiritual life informs our values informs our behaviors, and our behaviors inform our culture. And so understanding the truth of our mortality at a very profound level is an existential question that gives depth to human life.
And what would you say to that 5-year-old boy that had that first realization that everyone is going to die?
I think I wouldn't have said anything to the child who said, "You mean we're all going to die?" But I rather would have taken the child by the hand and taken him or her out into the natural world where birth and death are in constant presence, where the child can see the truth of reality through the eyes of someone who's not afraid.
In Iraq, death was in Michael's face all the time. It was nearly impossible not to face his mortality.
I remember one of those first days there was a mortar attack, and we all had to jump into a bunker, like right at the last second as mortars were hitting all around, and we're, running with our rifles in our hands, and we just dive into this bunker. And it was right when we had first got there, and me and my buddies were all kind of like worried, like, oh my God, that was crazy. But there was a bunch of other vets that were in the bunker too, and they'd already been there for months and months, and they were just calm, sitting there smoking cigarettes, and we were the ones that just got there. We were all like worried, In training, when you're doing these surgeries, you can only train for what surgeries happen. So we're training on appendectomies and colonoscopies and just whatever random stuff happens. But in Iraq, suddenly you're doing a quadruple amputation, fasciotomy, X-fix, and all these exploratory lab for a 50 cal gunshot wound. Even the worst ERs in the U.S. aren't going to see anything that we saw on a daily basis. There'd be time we'd be doing surgery and the mortars would be hitting the hospital. We can't leave in the middle of surgery, so we would just have to keep doing surgery as the whole hospital is shaking and part of it's collapsing and the lights are flickering. And some of that was just became common.
With him having to work 24 hours straight for 3 weeks at a time, to me that can really put the pressure on someone too, and cause someone to be in a stressful situation even more stressed.
We also got a lot of the reward too, because we got to be the ones to actually dive in and save this person's life or this person's limb. It's almost like that book, Johnny Got His Gun. We had patients like that where we just cut off all their arms and legs, and they're gonna wake up the next day and have no arms and no legs and just messed up. And I think in war, when you kind of lose those parts of yourself, it's that same phantom limb pain, but it's with almost parts of your soul where it's just part of it's gone, and you might still reach for it, but it's just gone. Sometimes we would have a patient die several times on the table, and we'd bring him back and bring him back. And I had several patients myself just die in my hands, and I just didn't feel anything about it. The most difficult surgery that I've ever done was actually a surgery on a bomb-sniffing dog. It was a German Shepherd. I remember feeling so much more sad for some reason just having that dog look up at me, where he had less of an idea of what was going on. He was just having fun, and next thing you know, he's blown up to pieces and he's getting surgery, and we gotta just look down at him. He's looking back up at you with those big brown eyes, and I just remember that was just a tough one for some reason. I don't know why, but that was just a tough surgery.
I was a little bit concerned about his emotional well-being. Whenever anybody goes over in the war, you're gonna come back with a lot of, things to deal with.
There just became a point where I'd be sleeping and the mortar attacks would start happening, and I'd be so tired that I wouldn't even get out of bed. I think for a person to survive in a war or do what they have to do, they have to just turn parts of themselves off, where, for instance, say there's fight or flight. You've got to turn that part off because it's just fight or fight.
In normal life, when the fight or flight response kicks in, we do have the option of flight. The word flight sums up my attitude toward religious belief, that it's a way to ward off existential dread. So religion doesn't work for me as a way to cope with mortality. But there's no question that it seems to work well for a great many people.
And I think most of the major religions, any which one you think about, still talks about the comfort value of what religion does to you.
I'm an atheist. I was raised in an atheist household too. For my age, that was an odd thing amongst my peers. But I don't believe that anything happens after you're dead. I think your brain is sort of just a squishy version of what a computer is. And when it goes off, it goes off. And I'm kind of comforted by that because really, I think the alternative of an eternity is every bit as frightening as the idea of oblivion, quite frankly. And in some ways, it could be worse. Oblivion isn't going to hurt you. You could get really bored with eternity.
I believe that eternity is far beyond any description that we can place on it. I believe the simplest and best explanation, it's forever in the presence of God. And if God is, as I believe, representing all that is good, I don't see how in the world I could ever get bored with that.
I can think logically or scientifically about death, but I think there's more to it. At least I'd like to live knowing that there's more to it, even if it's not true.
And I fully believe that there is an afterlife with my Creator.
And what happens if you're wrong?
I believe if I'm wrong, my life will still have had some meaning because of my belief in God.
If you knew you were wrong, would you live your life differently?
If I knew I was wrong, no, I don't believe I'd change a thing. I think this is the best way to be.
A good point of being Catholic is that you know that there is something good after this life. I think that faith helps people to cope with death. You can see that people with a kind of religious hope deals better with the knowledge of death.
I don't know if religious people are better able to cope with death and dying. I can't say that at all. You know, I've sat with religious people who died deaths that I wouldn't want to die, and I've sat with religious people whose religious really fed their own courage as they met death. So that is not a conclusion I could ever make. I do feel, however, that a deep meditation practice, in my experience, I do believe that makes a significant difference. Contemplating the truth of our mortality is fundamental in all Buddhist practice. This is really important because when we come into the realization of the truth of our impermanence, we have a very different relationship to how we live, how we treat others, and also of the preciousness of this human life.
What happens to that soul afterwards, we have no clue. We've never been to the other side and then come back to explain it. Judaism does not hide the reality of death from a communal perspective. So when it comes also to the funeral itself, people help in the burial. It is a profound Jewish tradition that people help put the earth on the casket. They take the shovel, they take earth with their own hands, and they fully experience the feel of the earth, the sound of the earth landing on the casket. It is not easy to do. You're never desensitized when someone you know dies. It touches you right here, and it'll shake you up.
What do you think happens when you die?
Not sure. I guess it would be nice if there's heaven and I'm there.
Over the years, I've had all different beliefs: reincarnation, heaven, nothing.
I guess whatever it is, we lose all interest in what's going on here because no one ever, seems to come back or try to contact their loved ones,
I'd like to think of that you go to a better place. You know, the ancient Romans thought of the Elysian fields, so that's what I like.
I think it will end up being a lot like it was before I was born, blackness. So it will not affect me because I will not be there to be affected.
We can't even comprehend infinity. We're incapable of it as people. So how can you comprehend what you're part of or what could be? I figure I'll let it be a surprise.
Oh, it's wonderful to work with Rachel. She has an amazing gift for connecting to people. And this work is so much just on its simplest level about connecting to people. And she just has a way of sharing herself through her eyes.
But sometimes I end up in restaurants. Overall, I found it wonderful, very exciting and surprising to myself. I got a real boost of confidence in myself, and I feel very, I guess, in a way proud that I was able to do this.
There's a lovely quality that Rachel has, just to be able to name what is true. Shall we do another one with a little bit of a darker kind of music, yeah? And fundamentally what is true is very beautiful and very liberating.
It helps me deal with my illness and gives me hope.
Because of her diagnosis and her experience with the medical world, I think she has an increased empathy for what that environment can be like.
I hope that people will remember me for, you know, my humor and creativity and the person that I am. The title of my book of poetry, which deals with my parents' experiences, I call the title Except for That. And that was my mother's attitude, that she had a happy childhood, she said. And when I reminded her about the war, she said, oh yeah, except for that. So she never focused on that. She always considered her life a miracle and something to cherish and enjoy. The survivors play poker. Every week they gather, Hanka, Gusta, Meyer, Hala, and Sam, to test their luck again. Seared blue numbers in ragged formation line up across their arms. 5 cards for everyone. Select the ones to keep. They place their bets on what to hold or hope to hold. Luck is their obstinate companion. They always break for tea, sliced apples, peeled oranges on an altar of white lace. And someone says, as someone always does, ah, let's enjoy now. I read somewhere the best invention in life is death, because if we knew we could live forever, we'd never do anything. And I think it's, whether we have an illness or not, it's the idea of death that drives us all to accomplish things in our life, because we know that there's an end. I accept it as part of life. I don't know if I'm not afraid of the physical death. I'm just gonna miss life.
If you only had 5 minutes to live, what would be the most meaningful things you could do in those 5 minutes? How important is it to maintain that perspective? Joan Halifax has spent the better part of her life caring for people in their final days and minutes.
I've been in the field of end-of-life care since 1970. My work now focuses primarily on training professional caregivers, and I still have the privilege of sitting at the bedside of dying people. I'm involved in working in hospitals all over the world at this point in my life. In a way, it's a kind of calling, as a way to begin a gentle revolution in the field of end-of-life care. I think my interest in end-of-life care really started when I was a child, when I was deeply ill, gravely ill. And it was how I was cared for that made a difference in my life. Not just that my life was saved, but the care that I received influenced me deeply and probably kind of turned on a compassion gene or a care gene. How can we bring more compassion, more respect into our care of dying people? And of course, there's not one person at this moment listening to my words who will not encounter death. That's very clear. And so this is a kind of complex that lives within us. How will we meet death? Who will be there when we die? What are our wishes? Should we have a prolonged dying process? How do we want to die? Do we want to hasten our death? It's very interesting to sit here for a few moments to reflect on the deaths that I've witnessed. And yet the one that is most vivid to me is the death of my father. The night that he died, we brought him home from the hospital, and he was not cognizant that one could see. I put my hands on either side of his head as he was going through this paroxysm, and I said hundreds of times, "Thank you, Daddy. Thank you." And it was something I felt with every cell of my body. The extraordinary gratitude that a daughter feels for the unconditional love of her father, knowing that I could not, in many lifetimes, express my gratefulness, except that it came forth like an ocean from me. Yeah. And he calmed and died. Even deaths that are hard, painful, deaths that are beautiful, I don't feel comfortable with the notion of a good death. Death is just death. Not good, not bad. It's as it is.
Few of us are truly unafraid in the face of death. A major challenge for Megan was not being consumed by it and not surrendering to the fear. Instead, she emerged from her ordeal stronger and with empathy and with wisdom beyond her years.
Leukemia has had effects. I don't pick things apart the way that I used to, which is a welcome change. I'm more sure of myself, I'm more independent. Earlier this year, I really wanted to go to the World Series. It was the Cardinals versus the Red Sox, which are my two favorite teams. They're playing in Boston, and I was in Boston. It was like, oh, I should go to this. Like, what else am I gonna have this chance? I kept thinking, oh, I'll find someone else to go with me. And, I kind of texted all my friends. I asked everybody I ran into, and no one wanted to. And I was like, oh, maybe I won't go then. And I was in class, and I was just finally like, wait, this is stupid. Like, I want to go to this game. It was actually kind of nice to be by myself, where I just got to really enjoy it, just to kind of just really like soak it in. And I had a really, really awesome time, and I befriended the people around me. It was so much fun. Now I can check that off the bucket list. It's nice not having to wait for people to catch up to you to do the things that you want. Not all the effects have been positive. I don't feel indestructible the way most 23-year-olds do anymore. I don't feel like this immortal person that nothing bad can happen to until I'm, really, really old. I don't think anyone ever thinks that they can face this kind of diagnosis or that they will. Everyone should be educated about mortality and death. I mean, it seems like this thing that you only have to deal with when you're 80 or 90 and this thing that seems so far away from people, especially like us in college and younger people, but it surprises you.
I don't think I think about it that often, but when you get older, like I am now, and you go to your class reunion, and there's about 30 names of guys, and you think of them like when you knew them, and it kind of stuns you every time you read the list, and you just recognize 10 years later there's going to be more on that list. I have a kidney transplant. I have my son's kidney in me, and I have had open heart surgery, and I'm still moving and feeling pretty good. And I guess that's the thing too. I don't want to die. I know people that actually say they look forward to it, but I like to hang on. I love life. I love breathing. If you've ever had pneumonia, you know what I'm talking about. I love breathing. I love sitting here in the shade, looking around, talking to you, my beautiful wife next to me. I just love it. I can't get enough of it. We're all dying. You're dying, I'm dying. I mean, you may get there before me. I mean, so it's not a given that either of us will be here tomorrow.
And Tom is not. He passed away months after our interview. It was a stark reminder that none of us can foresee, let alone control, when it will happen.
You spend the whole deployment thinking about what coming home is going to be like. And then once you come home, it's never like what you expect. I remember just getting in with fights and just doing more risky behavior because I didn't care if I lived or died.
When he came back, I did notice that there was something different about him. Like something had changed, like when he had gone over there, like some of the things that were important to him before weren't as important.
I think I came back from the war more closed off. I think I found it definitely harder to connect with people. You just come home and say, you know, what was this all for? You know, did we help make a country a better place or safer place? I wish I had a type of belief or something to believe in. I think there is that comfort to having faith. You know, right now I do believe in nothing, but I hope to one day believe in something.
So what happened to that altar boy?
Yeah, the altar boy's done and gone. He's just another life.
I think coming back home, it's tough to talk to people who haven't been there or through those same experiences that you've had. So coming home, you don't really want to burden your family and friends with that stuff. He never described any of the personal attacks that he went on. He had a different outlook when he came back.
I was driving my car recently in a snowstorm.
And there was this car that had stopped and spun out a little bit in front of me.
And then I had to stop at the last second, and I had swerved.
And I had crossed the median on the highway, and my car had spun out.
And my car's facing the wrong way on the highway as other cars are coming at me.
And the snow was just coming down hard.
And I remember at the time, my heart didn't even raise a beat, you know. I was just totally calm as the car's spinning.
Something like that just had no effect on me, I guess.
And I just put it in reverse and turned around. You know, I think you just do lose that part. What I value now most would probably be my family, my girlfriend and my daughter, and our life together. I would never let anything bad happen to either of them.
You said you would protect your family, but yet if you didn't care whether you died in a car accident or not, and you're gone, that's going to affect them.
Yeah, I guess it's not so clear-cut and defined how I feel about things, but I think it's possible to, care more about someone else than you care about yourself. I guess the biggest thing is you don't feel like you have a place in the world anymore. I don't want to die, but I'm not afraid of it. I don't have any fear involved with it.
For Michael, a paradoxical effect of war has been to eliminate his fear of death. For some of us, the problem is trying to manage the fear, at least to the point that it doesn't destroy our peace of mind. This film started a quest to figure that out. Its title, aside from that, was based on an old joke. Aside from that, Mrs. Lincoln, how is the play? It's an absurd joke, but there's a kernel of truth there. The inevitability of death doesn't necessarily have to overshadow every other aspect of life. It wasn't until months later that we learned that Rachel's book of poetry was coincidentally entitled Except for That. Her mom's response to how she could be grateful for a wonderful life in spite of the horrors of war and the Holocaust. I asked a lot of questions in the beginning. It comes down to one for me. Will coming to terms with the inevitability of death help us live a fuller, more authentic life? In the course of making this film, I've discovered it will for me. Perhaps the title we gave the film, long before we started shooting, is a clue to the wisdom we were searching for all along.
I think most people manage the knowledge of their mortality by setting it aside and paying as little attention to it as they possibly can. How can we go to a place where there is nothing? It's very hard to wrap your head around the idea of having no idea, to wrap your head around the existence of not existing.
Yeah, of course it's frightening, because it's like everything that happened while I was here. Well, that goes on, and I do not.
If you knew you were going to live forever, would you be doing this interview right now?
Yes.
Would you live your life any differently?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that at all?
I would sleep later all the time.
Why would I want to live forever? That's a terrible thought. And how can we understand that death is what gives us depth and character?
To make my life worthy, not just for myself, but also for other people.
The question of how we should live knowing we are going to die is a beautiful question. I think we should live generously.
If you have the privilege of being born and living on the earth, then sometime during your life you need to make a contribution. It gives more meaning to your life, and at the end of your life you may then have fewer regrets, and you may then be able to more gracefully leave this world in the knowledge that you've done your best.
The only difference that is going to matter 100 years from now, did you make a difference? Did you treat people well?
Some people spend a lot of time and energy in what are ultimately meaningless tasks. They live their lives as if they had an infinite amount of time ahead of them.
When I first got better, everything was so great. Like, oh, I finally get to leave my house. I'm not going to the doctor every day or every other day. And everything felt so great and so bright and just so alive, and it was wonderful. And then you do kind of go back into a certain complacency.
When you think about it, time is gold. That's the most important thing of being alive, is time. What you do with your time. Everything else is way down on the scale.
You don't have to sit around and think about death. The concept is to think about life.
I think what we do and the things that we have accomplished or done in our life, that remains in people's hearts, and maybe that's the spirit of that person. And in that way, they live on.
The most wondrous thing in the world is that all around us, people can be dying, and we don't realize that it will happen to us.